everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're teaching you Dawn of Peacemakers. Now this is a 1 to 4 player game for ages 14 and up that takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play depending on the scenario you're playing. There's also a gameplay video that I've done and an unboxing, so if you want to check those out, please do. And if you want to support the channel, be sure to check the description below for different ways to do that. Dawn of Peacemakers is set in Dimmeria. This is an exciting world of animal folk. Imagine our world, except humans never evolved, and instead multiple different animal species evolved to the point of learning language and eventually building civilizations. That's Dimmeria. There are 3 different booklets plus this introduction pamphlet in the game box. This pamphlet should be read first. These 2 booklets are used specifically for playing the campaign mode and the skirmish mode. The 3rd booklet is the index booklet, which contains rules for both rule sets for campaign and skirmish in alphabetical order for easy reference. It is not recommended for players to browse through this booklet as it contains major spoilers. However, for the purposes of looking up specific rules, it is often a better option than flipping through the campaign booklet. In the campaign, 1 to 4 players take the roles of adventurers with a mission of quelling hostilities between 2 warring nations. The campaign consists of 12 unique scenarios which together form a captivating, continuous story. The game also offers a skirmish mode in which 2 players control armies directly in order to defeat the opposing player. Players will build their armies and then have to adapt to the chosen map. At a later date, once I've completed the main campaign, I'll also be bringing a full how to play video for skirmish mode. Both the campaign and skirmish modes use mostly the same rules, but there are a few differences here and there. These differences are marked with a purple note, as you can see here or here, which indicates which rule set that rule belongs to. The game includes multiple sealed components with warning icons on them, as you can see here and here. Do not open any of these sealed components yet. These include exciting new game components and elements for the players to discover during the playthrough of the campaign. Most of these unlocked components can be used in skirmishes as well. For this reason, it's recommended that players complete at least a couple of campaign scenarios prior to trying the skirmish mode, as this will familiarize them with the rules as well as unlock more components. I'll also be providing a full how to play video for the skirmish mode at a later date once I've completed the main campaign. Prior to the first game of Dawn of Peacemakers, players need to assemble all 4 frontline signs. Players should attach the 2 card pieces using the plastic pins, as you can see here, which is also shown on the instruction pamphlet. There are 2 red and 2 blue frontline signs. In the campaign, only 1 of each color will be used, but in skirmish mode, all 4 are required. Next, players need to find both halves of the campaign deck, which is where many of the new cards needed for the campaign will be found. Here you see the top cards that you'll see in the sealed decks. Mine are unsealed as I've already begun playing the campaign, but just look for campaign deck first half and campaign deck second half cards on the top of the sealed decks. Players should unwrap these sealed decks from their plastic wrap without looking at the contents of the deck. Place both halves in the designated spot in the insert, with the second half on the bottom and then the first half directly on top of it. The top card of the campaign deck shows a lock and warning icon with a condition. Once that condition is met, draw cards from the deck one at a time until the lock card with another warning icon appears. Each time the player should be drawing from the deck, she'll be reminded in the campaign booklet with a purple note and open lock icon, like this example. With the exception of the initial decks, each and every card in the deck has a placement number in the bottom right corner. These numbers can be used to rebuild the decks if the players ever want to replay the campaign or reset it for any reason. And now you're ready to begin setting up the first scenario. Also, if you want to know more about the world of Dimmeria, the backside of the introduction pamphlet contains some backstory regarding both the Macaw and the Ocelot factions. But now it's time to move on to the campaign booklet. Players will find everything they need to know to begin their first scenario of Dawn of Peacemakers in the first 11 pages of this booklet. As players continue deeper into the campaign, more rules and components are unlocked and introduced, but players can use the index booklet whenever they can't quite remember an earlier rule or have additional questions about that rule. In this way, players don't necessarily need to remember exactly where a rule was first introduced in the campaign booklet, since every rule is listed in the table of contents in the index. A word of warning though, it is advised to only look at rules in the index that have already been introduced, as other rules could be or could contain spoilers. Whenever a new rule is mentioned in the campaign booklet, it is marked with an info icon like this one, as well as a short note. The player's objective is to quell hostilities between the macaws and the ocelots. Both sides are in control of their own army and have a level of motivation indicated on these sideboards. This indicates how much they want to continue the fight. Losing units is one of the primary ways a side's motivation is lowered, but there are also certain cards and effects that will lower motivation of the armies. In order to win a scenario when players first begin playing Dawn of Peacemakers, they will need to reduce each side's motivation to a certain level so that they simultaneously withdraw from the fight. However, letting the motivation of one side fall too low will cause that side to surrender, resulting in the players losing the game. Also, as players move on to future scenarios and unlock new features in the game, other win and loss conditions will be presented. Now let's take a look at the different card types in the game and what they are used for. Keep in mind that if a card ever conflicts with the rules of the game, the text on the card overrides the rulebook. Players may say anything regarding their own or other players' cards and intentions, however, they may not look at other players' cards unless specifically allowed to do so. The only cards a player can look at are their own. A player's resources are represented by resource cards. Each resource card can be used for various actions during the game. A resource card may have up to 3 rows of icons for influence, movement, and fortification. Resource cards also have schemes and effects written on them. When a player plays a resource card from her hand, she chooses one of the icon rows or the scheme effect for her action. Often, an action can only target a companion. An adventurer's companion is any unit or other adventurer that shares the same space with them. Now's also a good time to point out that any purple word is a keyword. Keywords will be introduced throughout the campaign and can also be looked up in the index. The word unit refers to any figure other than an adventurer, and units are always gray minis. Each animal folk has 3 different classes of units. Common, which always has 1 star or rank 1, special, which is a rank of 2, and leader, which always is a rank of 3. A single unit mini represents several soldiers. Let's take a closer look at the unit cards themselves. At the top of the card, players will find the unit's name, title, and rank. The more important the unit, the higher the rank. On the left side are the primary combat statistics for the unit. Offense is how strong a unit is. A unit may only attack enemies within their range. Defense helps the unit survive damage. And health indicates how much damage the unit can take before it is defeated. Any special abilities would be listed here. Commander Xochitl, for instance, has a special ability which triggers when he's injured. It states that if the commander is injured, his side's motivation will decrease by 1. And finally, on a unit card, players will find the skirmish costs here. That's ignored for campaign play. Before we move on, let's go back and take a closer look at this special ability, Cautious Leader. This special ability uses the keyword injured. An injured status is applied to a unit when that unit has taken damage equal to or higher than half of its health. If through various effects enough damage is ever removed from that unit such that it is now less than half damaged, then that unit is no longer considered injured and the ability would be canceled. If this unit were to be defeated in one fell swoop without first dropping below the halfway mark, this ability would still take effect when that unit is removed from the board. In Scenario 1, players are introduced to 4 units. Macaw soldiers are common units within the Macaw military and have no special abilities. Commander Xochitl is a leader in the Macaw military. Ocelot warriors are a common unit in the Ocelot military and have no special ability. Players should note that the Ocelot warriors and the Macaw soldiers have the same stats. Often units in the game will have similar stats, making them easier to remember. Ocelot archers are special units and have increased range, allowing them to attack units farther away than the other units we're aware of so far. Each army's commands are determined by that army's order cards. An army's order is comprised of a pair of cards. The ploy card forms the left half, while the task card forms the right half. Both ploy and task cards are considered order cards. All armies in Dimeria have similar cards in their task decks, which tell in general what the units will do. The ploy decks are where the personalities of the factions shine through, as they represent the different nations' varied military conventions. Each task card has a colored insignia icon representing one of the 3 different groups a unit may be in, indicated by the shape of their base. In this case, you can see it's a circular base, so if this unit were on the board, this order would apply to it. All units sharing the same color base are part of the same army. If units share the same color and shape, they form a group, such as these two. When an army executes an order, the insignia indicates which specific group is taking the action. Some order cards have this skirmish icon on the bottom. This icon has no use in the campaign, so players may simply ignore the icon for now, but still use these cards for the campaign. There is one card which is not used during the campaign. This organizing ploy is left in the box while playing the campaign, and players are reminded of this by this icon. The following basic setup stays the same throughout the campaign. However, each scenario will have additional information that players will have to apply. Each scenario also has unique terrain and unit placement, as well as specific order decks for the different sides. The setup for the first scenario, Between Two Worlds, can be seen here on page 7 of the campaign rulebook. Place the double-sided game board at the center of the gaming area, showing the appropriate side face up. Attach insignia bases to the units as instructed. Players should know that even if the portraits give players difficulty in recognizing which unit it's showing, the rank is also shown beneath the portrait, which should help distinguish the individual units. Then arrange the terrain tiles and units on the game board as instructed. Place the sideboards for both sides near the game board. Make sure to use the side showing the campaign icon in the left corner as opposed to the skirmish icon. Adjust the frontline signs to show the directions according to the scenario setup and place them near their respective sides' sideboards. Set the motivation for both sides by placing glass beads on top of the appropriate number. Often a unit will gain a motivation bonus from terrain it's standing on, such as this tower here. It's important to note that these initial starting bonuses are already included in the motivation values provided by the setup. Build the ploy and task decks for each army according to the build shown on the scenario setup page. For instance, to build the Macaw deck, I would need 1 move task card with the circle insignia and 1 move task card with the star insignia, 1 cover task card with the star insignia and a cover task card with the circle insignia, 2 strike cards with the circle insignia and 2 strike cards with the star insignia, and finally 1 change of plans card. And for the ploy deck, I would use all the Scarlet Macaw ploy cards, with the exception, of course, of organizing, as we've previously mentioned. Place these decks near their respective sideboards and leave room for discard piles as well. Place the unit cards used in the scenario within view of all players. Shuffle all resource cards together, deal 2 to each player, and place the remaining resource cards on the indicated space. This is known as the resource deck, and the 2 cards dealt to each player are their initial starting hand. Place the fortification cubes, the die, and the damage tokens near the game board, as well as any other various tokens the game may call for. This forms the supply. Each player decides which adventurers they play and places its figure on the game board in the space marked with this arrow. The 4 available adventurers are introduced on the cover of the campaign booklet here. It's recommended that players use the same adventurer throughout the campaign, but it's not required. After each player chooses their adventurers, they all open the envelope addressed to that specific adventurer, and then share the contents with the other players. The player who most recently avoided conflict is given the starting player token, or players are free to select a player at random. Each scenario is played on a different map based on the scenario guide in the campaign book. Different terrain tiles are placed out as indicated, so let's take a look at each terrain tile players will encounter during scenario 1. Plains have no special effect, and all empty spaces are considered plains. Units defending in fountains or rivers gain +1 shatter as indicated by this symbol here. This makes those units more vulnerable. Incoming damage is increased by 1 for each point of shatter a unit has. Players or card effects can never place fortifications on rivers or fountains. Bridges are mechanically the same as plains. Units in forest have stealth as indicated by this icon. Units with stealth may only be attacked from the same or adjacent spaces. Even if a unit has guard, which we'll discuss in a little more detail during the scheme section of this video, it can still only be attacked from the same or adjacent spaces when it has stealth. Units on rock formations have +1 defense, making them more durable since incoming damage is reduced by 1 for each point of defense. Units on a tower have +1 defense. However, also when a unit moves onto a tower which had no allied units on it, that side's motivation raises by 1. If a side's last unit on a tower either moves off or is defeated, then lower that side's motivation by 1 as well. Each round consists of 3 phases: the adventurer phase, the army phase, and the status phase. A single round is over when all phases have been resolved once, at which point the game either ends or the next round begins. During the adventurer phase, players take their turns in clockwise order, starting with the player who has the starting player token. On a player's turn, she may take as many or as few actions as she wishes by spending resource cards from her hand. As previously mentioned, a resource card may have up to 3 rows of icons, as well as a scheme written on it. These make up the available actions of the card. When a player plays a card, she must choose and resolve only one of the available actions. After that action is resolved, place the resource card in the discard pile face up. Players are free to resolve the same action multiple times on their turn as long as they have the necessary resource cards. So for instance, if this player had moved 2 spaces, she could again move with this card. We're going to discuss each of these actions in detail momentarily, but first there's an important concept to keep in mind. If a player were to play a card such as this one for either the influence found here at the top or the scheme, that player would then be allowed to choose a deck and draw the top card. If it's the influence, she's just drawing the top card. If it's the scheme here, you can see she would discard the top card. However, if that top card is a task card, and when she reveals it, it turns out that it belongs to a unit that is no longer on the board. So in this case, all the circle units have been wiped off the board and no longer exist. This card will actually be removed from play since it is irrelevant now, and the next card would be drawn instead. Let's take a look at the different actions a player may take during her turn. However, keep in mind that if a player decides to take no actions during her turn, she may instead discard 1 resource card to then draw 1 resource card. The influence action is used to discuss with the armies and persuade them to alter their plans. The amount of influence icons on the card indicates how many order cards in total a player must draw when using a card for the influence action. When using the influence action, the player may only draw from a companion's deck. The player draws order cards from the chosen army's order decks one at a time until all influence has been used. So in this case, she may choose to draw 2 task cards, or she may choose to draw 1 task card and then 1 ploy card. This action must be fully resolved prior to continuing the player's turn. The active player then looks at the drawn cards privately, and if she desires, she may play additional influence to draw additional cards. It's also possible for other players at this point to play influence so that the active player may continue drawing cards. If another player plays a card to do this, that player does not have to have a valid companion. As you can see here, this player has no companions and still could play influence to assist this player in influencing this army. However, even if it is another player providing the influence, it is still the active player who decides which decks to draw from. Then, once everyone decides to stop playing additional cards, the active player, listen up Alpha Gamers, only the active player decides how to arrange the drawn cards and returns them to their respective decks. If the Change of Plans card is ever drawn from the task deck, it is immediately resolved by shuffling it and the discard pile back into the rest of the task deck to form a new task deck. If the ploy deck were to ever run out of cards and more cards need to be drawn, it is shuffled to create a new ploy deck. However, a player will never lose influence due to change of plans or due to a ploy deck running out. The player keeps any cards she'd already drawn and reshuffles the rest. The travel action, seen here, is used to move the player's adventurer on the battlefield. The number of travel icons, 3 in this case, indicates how many movement points the player gains when using a card for the travel action. 1 movement point allows the player to move her adventurer to 1 adjacent space. The player may spend movement points 1 at a time during her turn and is not required to use all movement points gained. However, any movement not used at the end of a player's turn is lost. The secure action, seen here, is used to build defensive structures to protect units. The number of fortification icons indicates how many fortification tokens the player gains from the supply when using a card for the secure action, in this case 2. A player may place fortifications on the space she is on, and also on any adjacent space, 1 at a time. Remember, as previously mentioned, fortifications may never be built on rivers or fountains. Fortifications also are specific to the space they are placed on and not to a unit, so even when a unit moves away, the fortification will remain. A player is not required to place all fortifications gained in this way, but loses any unplaced fortifications at the end of her turn. Also, there is considered to be an unlimited supply of fortifications, so in the rare case that they run out, simply use a suitable substitute. The player may also choose to play a resource card for its scheme. Schemes are used for all kinds of tricks the adventurers have up their sleeves. The player must fully resolve the scheme's immediate effects before continuing her turn. However, if the card has an ongoing effect, such as Lookout, keep the card on the table until it has resolved. Once a card scheme has fully resolved, the card is discarded into the resource discard pile as normal. I'd like to draw your attention to one scheme with the keyword guard. Encouraging Words causes all your companions to have guard during this round. Units will prioritize enemy units with guard before attacking anything else as long as a unit is within range and can be attacked. So if this Ocelot Archer were attacking, even though normally, based on combat rules, which we'll discuss shortly, she would attack the leader here. Instead, she'll attack this macaw here, since this adventurer has played Encouraging Words on this macaw, giving him guard. When a player ends her turn, the first thing she does is draw new resource cards based on the number of players in the game. This chart here, at the bottom of page 9, indicates how many cards the player will draw. The easiest thing to remember is that players will always draw a total of 4 cards. So in a 1-player game, 4 cards are drawn. In a 2-player game, 2 cards at the end of a player's turn. In a 3-player game, the first player will draw 2 cards and the other 2 players will each draw 1. And finally, in a 4-player game, each player will draw 1 card at the end of her turn. If the resource deck is ever completely depleted when a player needs to draw from it, first shuffle the discard pile to form a new deck, and then place it on the resource deck space. In the rare case that both the resource deck and the discard pile run out simultaneously, Players can't draw more cards until one of them stops being so greedy and plays some cards. After the adventurer phase, it's time for the army phase. Players draw one card from each order deck and place them on top of their corresponding discard piles. If a ploy deck is ever depleted when a card needs to be drawn, shuffle the discard pile to create a new deck. And then draw the card as usual. If the Change of Plans card is drawn from the task deck, the player reshuffles the discard pile, including Change of Plans, with the rest of the deck to create a new deck. And draw another task card as usual. Now let's say that the blue star group had been eliminated by this point. If a task card is ever drawn at the start of an army phase for a group that no longer has any units in play, remove that card completely from play and draw a replacement. If, on the other hand, when this card were drawn, blue star units were still in play, but then prior to their activation, some effect eliminated the final blue star unit, no replacement card will be drawn. The drawn ploy and task cards form an order for each army. It's important to read the full order for each army before executing them. The group indicated on the task card is referred to as the active group. Players may always look through the discard piles of the order decks, but may not reorder them. And it's also important to realize that during the army phase, players are not making any decisions. The armies control themselves entirely based on these orders drawn. The sequence of resolution of the orders is determined by both the ploy and task cards. The first thing players should do is look at the speed of an order, which is found at the bottom of the ploy card. A fast order would be resolved prior to a normal order, and a normal order prior to a slow order. Let's say that closing is the ploy for the order we're looking at right now. It has a normal speed. However, if both armies are using the same speed, so in this case, let's say the ocelots are also using a normal speed ploy, then players must look at the task card to determine which order activates first. Move tasks are executed prior to cover tasks, and cover tasks prior to strike tasks. Many times, the speed of the ploy, in this case normal and normal, and the type of task, strike and strike, will be identical. In that case, both orders are resolved simultaneously. Any effects from the ploy cards come into effect when the task is resolved. Now let's discuss the three types of tasks in more detail. When a group is ordered to move, all units in that group move. A unit will first attempt to move one space in the direction of its frontline sign. However, if movement would result in that unit occupying the same space as an enemy unit, then those units do not move. Also, a unit should only move if it results in it moving closer to at least one enemy unit. For instance, if this unit was the only enemy unit left on the board, and this unit was ordered to move, as you see here, it actually would not move to here because it's still the same distance from this enemy unit as it was prior to the move. If an adventurer shares a space with a moving unit, that adventurer may optionally move with that unit for free. Cover is actually the simplest of the tasks. When units are ordered to cover, all active units simply gain +2 defense for the round. When the strike order is given, all units in active groups try to perform a single attack targeting an enemy unit. It's important to understand that all units on the same side are considered allies, while all the opposing units are considered enemies, and adventurers are not units and are not on either side, and therefore no attacks may target them. A unit can attack enemies as many spaces away as their range indicates. Both the Macaw soldier and Commander Sochi Yamak have a range of 2. The way a unit prioritizes its target may seem a little complicated at first. However, it's actually very simple once you see it. Also, the game comes with these reference cards to help remember the rules for attack prioritizing, as well as attack resolution. A unit's first priority is to attack the closest enemy unit. So in this case, the Macaw soldier would attack the Ocelot archer, even though this Ocelot warrior is directly in front of him. This archer is closer, and so that is the target. If instead multiple enemies are tied for the closest distance from the attacker will instead prioritize the space directly in front of them, as indicated by their front line sign. Then, if no enemy units are in that space, the attacker continues looking clockwise until an enemy is found. So in this case, the Ocelot warrior would be the target instead of the archer. If there are multiple targets on the same space the attacker targets, then the enemy unit with the largest number of damage tokens is the target. Keep in mind, this is different than saying the enemy with the least health, especially when enemies sometimes will have differing amounts of starting health. If multiple targets on the same space have the same amount of damage tokens, as you can see here, both have 0, the attacker targets the enemy unit with the lowest rank, so in this case, the Ocelot warrior. If multiple targets on the same space have the same amount of damage tokens and the same rank, then randomly select which enemy is the target by rolling this die. If multiple attacks would occur at the same time and would target the same enemy unit as you see here, they do so even if just one of those attacks would be enough to defeat the target. You can see this Ocelot warrior has 4 damage already. With only 1 life remaining, either of these attacks would kill it, yet both attacks will still target that Ocelot warrior. In this case, add the offense values of all attacking units together and resolve it as if it were a single attack. All special abilities from attacking units will be applied to this combined attack as well. When a unit is attacked, resolve it in the following way. Incoming damage is equal to the attacking unit's offense. That damage is first absorbed by any fortification tokens on the target unit's space, all the way up to the total amount of incoming damage if possible. Remove this number of fortification tokens and return them to the supply. Occasionally, multiple simultaneous attacks may target different units on the same space. In that case, each removed fortification token reduces damage to all units by 1. If the incoming damage isn't reduced to 0 by the fortifications, next adjust based on the target's defensive values. 1 point of defense lowers incoming damage by 1, while each point of shatter increases it by 1. In this case, the Ocelot warrior has no shatter adjustment or defensive adjustment, and the Ocelot warrior has no built-in defense either. If the incoming damage is still greater than 0, the attack deals that amount of damage. Place the corresponding amount of damage tokens from the supply near that miniature. There is considered to be an unlimited supply of damage tokens, so in the rare case players run out, well, first off, that's quite the bloodbath you're wading through there. And second, find something suitable to act as a replacement to mark the damage. If the unit ever receives a number of damage tokens equal to or higher than her total health, the unit is defeated and removed from play, and their damage tokens are returned to supply. Defeated units are then placed on the reserve spaces on their sideboard, and the motivation for that army is reduced by 1. If a side's last unit is ever defeated, immediately drop the motivation to 0. Also, if a side's last leader is defeated, the motivation also drops directly to 0. So while leaders can be very dangerous, they also often must be protected. Let's take a moment to discuss the monkey wrench in each army's ploy deck. Each ploy deck has 2 revoked cards. These cards represent the exhaustion of both warring sides and their reluctance to continue spending resources to extend the battle. When a revoked card is drawn during the army phase, immediately lower that side's motivation by 1. Also, don't resolve any text written on the task card when it's combined with a revoked ploy card. Once the army phase has been entirely resolved, the players enter the status phase. As a quick reminder, motivation on the sideboard is divided into 3 parts. If a side's motivation is above 2, that side believes it can still win the scenario. If a side's motivation is a 2 or 1, then that side is ready to withdraw. And finally, if that side reaches a 0, it surrenders. When the status phase begins, players go through all the game end conditions listed for the current scenario. In scenario 1, the players lose if at least one side has 0 motivation. And the players win the scenario if both sides are ready to withdraw. Players read through the conditions one at a time, and if any of them are met, the game ends immediately. As previously mentioned in future scenarios, the win and loss conditions may be more complex or involved than the two you see here, and it may be possible for multiple to be met at the same time. If that's the case, the win or loss condition listed first is the one players will use. If no condition is met, the game continues. If the game does continue, the player counterclockwise from the starting player receives the starting player token so that the last player of the current round always becomes the first player of the following round. And that's everything you need to know to start playing Dawn of Peacemakers. There are surprises in the form of components and cards and rules all throughout the campaign that will be introduced to the players. These will be explained in detail in the campaign book as well as the index. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my channel, consider subscribing and also consider supporting the channel if you'd like to. There's different ways to do that in the description below. You can also find me over on Twitter @boredoffline. And until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.